we are. First race day ever. Actually, no, first test day ever, but first race event ever. Which is mad when I say it out loud, but I'm actually here and it's happening.
For me, this being my first ever race event, I've decided that I'm going to do a full day test today. So it's Friday at the moment, got here last night, set up tents. Sam, who I'm using his car, Sam Mckee, he always drives here in his car, so it's not trailers. He brings his camping stuff and all race spares with him. So pretty simple setup we've just got our two cars and our tents. So quite DIY, if you will. Now I'm happy that I chose to do a full day test today because it definitely it's going to give me more time to think through things. I mean, I've had my first session about 45 minutes ago. Now we're going to go out again in 15 minutes. And I've never driven Alton Park before. I've never actually been here before, and first time driving Sam's car. So it's going to take a few sessions, I reckon, to get to a point of familiarity. Is that the word? Yeah. Anyway, you know what I'm getting at. But I'm definitely glad that I'm doing a full day today because tomorrow the running that we've got is, I want to say it's a 25-minute quali, and then the race is 45 minutes. So having a total of 2 hours track time today split into full 30-minute sessions is going to be a huge benefit. And having that much test time available meant I was able to kind of section off different points of learning throughout the day. So I didn't have to all compress learning the circuit, learning the car, trying to become consistent, yada, 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 all into maybe like a half day, for instance. And you don't know what's going to happen on test day either. There could be loads of red flags. And unfortunately, you can't recover the track time on a test day. If there's a red flag, that's just hard luck for you, basically. So the priority in this session was about trying to get to grips with the circuit, driving the lines we discussed, riding the curbs or not.
I was surprised how stiff the throttle is.
And finding out some things to do with the car, like that, for example. So stiff throttle noticeable through the paddock because it was cable activated, which is so much better on circuit than a by-wire system. You just get an immediate response. If I had the choice of that in every car I drove from now on, I would totally take a cable every time for its responsiveness.
I'll have to get used to this lark of not being able to turn my head as much. Yeah.
And that was the other thing that I was also finding out through, even just toddling through the paddock, was that wearing a head and neck restraint, it really restricts the amount of motion that you have in your neck from side to side. Which isn't a problem at all when you're out on circuit. It made immediate sense as soon as I started driving round, but just trying to look at Sam over my shoulder driving through the paddock, that's when it became apparent how restricted it is compared to, especially when I normally race in Club 100. I need full range of motion with my neck to be able to look around to see other drivers coming by. That makes it sound like I'm always losing places, but you know what I'm getting at. So I was sent through the assembly area here, which leads out to the end of the pit lane. We were debating possibly cutting through a garage, but we figured out fairly quickly that they were full of other cars that had prepaid to book the garages for the test day, most of which were Enduro KAs. So the championship event that I had entered on this weekend was run by MSVR, and the main championship racing that weekend was the Enduro KA Championship, for which, I don't know, there were like 30 or 40 entries. It was a pretty good grid, actually. But they were the main focus of the weekend because they had an hour qualifying on the Saturday and a 5-hour race following that. The championship that I had entered to compete in was the MSV Track Day Trophy, not to be confused with Track Day Championship, which run some more control parts than the trophy. So for example, in Championship you need to run on R888 tyres, whereas you had free reign over tyre choice as long as it wasn't slick tyres in Track Day Trophy. So the priority for me in this session was about learning the circuit. I already knew which direction it goes. That sounds really basic, but it's not difficult to learn a circuit, relatively speaking, before you arrive nowadays. I mean, I've driven a few laps on project cars, and yeah, you got to take it with a pinch of salt on a video game, but you do at least get an understanding for at least the direction the track goes, the radius of the curbs. Sometimes even if there's undulations in the track, I've got to be honest and say that video games do a pretty good job of that nowadays. Even if the bumps aren't necessarily exactly as vicious as they are in real life, at least you get an idea for where to expect certain undulations in the tarmac. So the track walk that Sam and I had done the previous evening highlighted a few things that you do not get through video games and through watching on telly, and that is how utterly ferocious the curbs are, especially around Alton Park. So what we discussed was that there were maybe, I think, 2 curbs that we were willing to run across the whole circuit. The rest of them, it was very much a case of stay the heck off or ruin the car potentially, because you would just knacker suspension components by running a lot of these curbs. They were so aggressive. The curbs of note that we could run on was coming out of Shellall's hairpin. I'll highlight this on the next lap. There's a curb on the left entry chicane that you could run half of it, and I think just having a bit of a nibble on the outside curb here on the exit of Lodge wasn't too bad either. But otherwise, yeah, you really want to stay off the curbs at Alton Park unless you're, well, I don't know, unless you're running a car where it doesn't matter if you tear through parts and just need to replace them. So to try and talk you through some of the things that I learned on the track, well, relatively late turn into first corner, Old Hall. Don't touch the curb on the inside, don't touch it on the outside. Track limit sensor on the outside as well, so you don't want to be running over that, otherwise you might get a penalty in the race. Into Cascades, third corner, you turn in relatively early because the camber on the inside, it brings you in nicely. The apex point is with the more red curbing on the inside that's more noticeable. Again, don't run the curb on the outside, very aggressive. Track limit sensor on the concrete on the outside of there as well. Coming up to Island Curve, very little braking into this. Again, early, there's a little bit of camber that helps hug you in if you stay within the left side of the circuit. Big braking zone down into Shell Oils. Now, this is a steep turn, man. Like, you don't realise it until you stand on the circuit, but it is so banked. So you can really fire it in there with a lot more speed than you might think otherwise. And it's an early turn in for that corner as well, because the camber helps keep you in. Now, this curb on the left entry here is the one I was saying you can run about half of. If you go any further than that, I'll include a clip later, but it makes the car absolutely fly, and it probably wrecks suspension components by doing that as well. So down the back straight, staying right, not just because of traffic, but actually the circuit doesn't rise up as much, so I'm sure it saves you a little bit of time in not rising and falling so much. Through this complex here, you want to sort of go 2/3 across the circuit, so it doesn't make it too difficult to come back across to open up this corner here, which is the important one. You want to get a good run out of there to get a run up to the bridge and up to Druids Corner. It's not difficult to drive this part of the circuit, you just pin your foot to the floor. Tricky braking zone here into a double right apex. This is a corner that I had to build up to a lot during the day. Ideally, you want to be 2/3 of the way across the circuit between the two apexes, as long as you can get it back in for the second apex. Now, lots of bumps coming in this straight section on the way to Lodge here. Makes the braking zone quite tricky, depending on what car you're in. Again, relatively early turn in there because there's camber that pulls you into the inside. You can let the car run out, but it gets quite light going over the apex. And then down the pit straight, which isn't a pit straight, call it a pit curve, and that is a lap. So it's really difficult to fit in all of that detail that you can achieve on a track we'll discuss into even a relatively slow second lap of a test session. So there's so much you can find out from doing a track walk that I would recommend it to everyone if they can possibly do it at every circuit they go along to. Now, by this point of the session, the car had definitely warmed up enough, so I was happy to push on and start changing up to higher gears at a higher RPM. As you can see, I'm testing the limits of the grip in places now already. So I was feeling immediately very comfortable in the car, which was great. Not testing the braking points too much yet, just needing to get a feel for the brakes. In Sam Mckee's BMW, oh my god, the brakes are amazing. It's running ABS, so there's a nice safety net there for when you do start testing it. You're not going to screw up your tyres by having some potential lock-up. But what is nice is that you can just build confidence through the brakes, and they are so steady. So it felt actually genuinely very easy to drive this car quickly. My strongest point of reference being my road car, which is a Toyota GT86, which is rear-wheel drive, running a tiny bit less power, Probably about the same weight actually, so in terms of chassis balance and handling setup, they didn't feel too dissimilar. So that meant I was quite comfortable with this car relatively early on. Not changing up at the red line. So the original red line of this car I think was 6,500 revs. Sam raised it slightly to 7,000 just to give more options with gearing around circuits, but generally what we were doing is shifting up a gear at 6,500. And yeah, the other thing with building through the braking phases was it was quite tricky to heel and tow unless you were properly committed on the brakes, because you wouldn't have the right angle to go from the brake to the throttle heel and towing unless you were actually braking properly. So this isn't something that I managed to get done in this session here, and it actually caused me a bit of leg ache from the way that I was kind of twisting, I guess, my whole body from my glutes down to try and get some heel and towing done. But actually, if you brake properly in this car, then it's an extremely natural position, heeling and towing. And the other points to mention that I realised on the first test session was to do with track etiquette between drivers. Now, no one was going all guns out in the first session by any stretch, so there was no one hassling me to overtake me in the same way that if I saw them behind me, then I was getting out of the way relatively quickly. So I think I've got a Janetta behind me at the moment, possibly a GT5. And it's real simple. You just wait behind someone and they'll let you go on either side of the circuit when they're ready to. And I think everyone was using their mirrors, or at least aware of who was around them, really well in this, at least the first session anyways. So in comparison to some of the track days I've driven, very happy with everyone's awareness on circuit, which was nice because it wasn't intimidating to be on circuit knowing that you could get overtaken left to right in a braking zone anywhere, because everyone was just being sensible and relatively chill about it. Yes, still driving quickly, but without the aggression around other drivers. And in terms of the things that you need to do before actually getting on the test day, I was expecting a full briefing like you would get for a race day or a track day, but there was actually none of that at all, other than having to fill out a form online before entering the test, going on to signing on, getting your wristband when you show your race license, and then that's it, that's your ticket to get out on track. Procedures are probably a bit different at the moment due to reactions to COVID-19 and how most things have moved online to do with driver briefings and whatnot, which was definitely the case for the race, because any stuff that was done for the briefings to do with the race was all done online by just reading up on text bits that you had written out that you had to acknowledge and then sign off for online. And the final thing worth mentioning about those of you who are watching, potentially thinking about getting into motorsport, who are seeing this as literally my first experience, a really big thing worth mentioning is to do with what happens in the event of an accident. So this isn't something that I was particularly aware of when I started looking into getting into motorsports, and it's relatively the same as when you're on a track day. Now, you can take out insurance and that will cover your back. However, track day insurance and race insurance, astronomically expensive. Of course, if you write off your car, then it's like the biggest bargain you could have ever had. But if nothing happens, then you'll be sitting there thinking, well, why did I spend the money? So in my case here, we have not got insurance, and it's very much a case of if you bend it, you mend it. That goes for track days, that goes for racing as well. So my arrangement with Sam here was basically if any damage came to the car as a direct result of my driving errors, then I would be paying for the damage cost there. Or if another driver drove into the side of me while out on circuit, again, I would be liable for that cost. And that's just the way it is. So plan for this first session was I was just going to come in halfway through the session, make sure that everything was okay with the cars. We were going to test the tyre pressures. He was going to torque the wheels, just make sure that everything seemed okay. And this is where I made my first mistake of the weekend. I didn't make any catastrophic mistakes by any stretch, but one thing that's nice to do is to cool off the brakes before you come into the pits, especially on a test session. So yeah, you can see me pointing, I've just noticed, and you can see it on the video as well, that the left front brake was not having a very fun time, sitting in the pits, sitting there hot, not getting any fresh air to it, in the same way that you would if you just kept driving around on circuits. So, I mean, I know this from my track day stuff anyways, but I just forgot because I was following that Porsche Cayman 718 GT4 round for the last lap there. Just back off a lot more and call the brakes and look after the car basically when you're on test session. Sam has a additional fan which he wanted me to turn on when I was in the pits as well. That's to just help keep stuff inside the engine cool, which I also forgot to turn on, and he leant across and turned on for me when I came into the pits. But as you can see, it was a quick check over, everything with the car was fine, so got sent back out again. And unfortunately for me, at this point, the track was clear behind me, but then a emergency vehicle had to come past and they went out on circuit, and that was the end of the session. I just got pointed back into the assembly area, making a bit of a pleb of myself because I wasn't quite sure if I was going to be allowed out or not. But yeah, got sent back around, and that was the end of my first session. Still a good first session. I got done what I needed to, even though it was cut slightly short. But yeah, productive start to the day, good first test session, and I knew what I could carry forwards with me to the second session of the day and start pushing on harder in terms of driving the car, trying to achieve more pace. So despite the fact it looks like I haven't moved, I have been out for my second session. I'm just back in the same chair that I was in before. So I've had my 2 morning sessions now. What was nice in the second session, the track was just a bit clearer overall. So more opportunity for consistent lapping, which is good. So at one point in the session, Sam said that I managed to get a few 2-minute 2 laps in, where it was within roughly half a second within those 4-lap stretch. So there's lots of clear running to be had on the test day. I don't know if it depends on the test day how busy it is, but I mean, there's a reasonable sorry, try that with my mouth connected to my brain. There's a reasonable number of cars out here today, and there's a big old spread in the sessions that we're in as well. So when I went out for the first one this morning, I think probably the quickest cars that I came across was a previous generation Renault Clio which was on slicks. That was an absolute monster in the corners, and there was a Porsche GT4 Club Sport, so that's the it was the 718 as well, so that's the slightly newer one. That was going relatively relaxed pace in the first session, but they definitely picked up in the second session. And then, as I was coming into the second chicane, up comes behind me a GT3 Lamborghini Huracan. I didn't know it was there. It just appeared out of nowhere. So it's mad how you can find that big a difference in speed between the cars. Like Sam said, the Lambo was going round in about 1 minute 30, or maybe just under, where I'm lapping 2-minute 2s at the moment. So it's bloody mental. But I'll tell you what, when that car comes up behind you that quick, you are getting out of the way straight away. That was intimidating. Fuel pump.
Yeah, switch that on. You'll probably be okay for the fan unless you sit in for ages and ages. Oh yes, fuel you might start to get low. So if you get hesitation, come here, we'll gas it and go again.
Okay. Yeah, got to.
As you will have just heard, that was one of our main aims throughout the final session of the day. So because I'd found my pace actually during the second session of the day and consolidated that in the third session, then for us part of the last session was learning how low we could run the fuel before I experienced any fuel starvation throughout the session, and that in turn would let us know how much we needed to fuel the car for both qualifying and the race, because obviously the less fuel you have in the car, the quicker you're going to go because it's less weight in the car. So for me personally, other than finding that out during the session, I wanted to try and find a consistent rhythm and pace in this session and a way of achieving the same lap time that required less drama, basically. So it involves me trying to figure out how to manage the temperature of the tyres, making sure my braking points were super consistent with the same feel each time, so that way it would be more representative of race pace, basically. And it only took about half a lap to warm up the car this time round, so I was shifting up at 5,000 revs until the engine got to about 80 degrees, which I could see on the readout if you see a couple of green-ended wires coming out of this thing by the purple dinosaur. If you want to know about the purple dinosaur, ask Sam. I don't know the backstory to do with that. It's like a little mascot for the car, essentially. But yeah, so this is my first flying lap of the session, and now I'd got a bit of space in front of me, then it was time to press on, much like I would do in the qualifying session the next day. So I'll talk you through a lap that I had. This was my third lap of the session, just to talk you through the differences between what I experienced at the start of the day and what I could do here. So immediately coming into Old Hall, about 25 metres later on the brakes, much more committed throughout the corner. I was definitely heavier on the throttle there than I was earlier in the day. Yes, resulted in a bit too much slide in the car, but it was a heck of a lot quicker than earlier. Coming into Cascades, a little bit tighter on the inside and definitely wider on the exit. So I was a bit more confident with where I could place the car by this point in the day, without feeling like there was as much risk of potentially running a curb by accident. Not getting a clean run into Islands Bends there, but it gave me a chance to practice offline braking going into the Shell Oils hairpin, so actually that was quite useful, finding that I needed to overtake cars just to continue progress later on in the day. Thankfully, guys watching their mirrors throughout the whole day, so I never had any issues with any misunderstandings on track. Through the left entry chicane there, just using a lot more of the track, running a little bit of curb, which I found was doable without it being too mechanically synthetic. Much deeper in the braking zone here. I think I was a good 50 metres later on the brakes there than I was earlier in the day. Getting a bit tail happy on the exit, but just trying to test the limits of the grip a lot more. And I actually changed my gearing approach as well. So coming out of Knickbrook, which was the right hand I just came out of, I experimented between third and fourth. I found that fourth was better shifting up just before entry to the corner, because it saves a bit of time when shifting gears on the exit. Much more confident through Druids than I was earlier, running wider on the exit. It's a bit funny because you can't see the exit coming out of Druids, so you kind of have to aim for a certain point visually on the bridge. And when it came to the bigger braking points, like into Shell Oils and into Lodge here, I was down changing straight from fifth to third. The brakes are so good in Sam's car that it was a bit of a faff trying to go from fifth to fourth to third. It was much easier to just leave the down changing a little later in the braking zone and just go straight from fifth to third. Yes, it meant a bit more than a blip. It was more of riding the throttle to build up the revs more to get down to third, but it was definitely quicker when we were both driving in that way throughout the race and the qualifying as well. Another thing we chose to try out both in the third session and in this session was partway through the session I was going to come into the pits relatively hot, so yes, managing the temperature of the brakes on the in-lap like I would do in the race, but the point was to test how long it took to go through the pit lane. So in our race, the regulation was that from entering the pit lane to leaving the pit lane, you had a minimum time of 2.5 minutes. So what we needed to find out therefore is how long it took us to actually drive through the pit lane, stop, go and leave. So I'm just building up at the end of this lap to coming into the pit, so I've been trying to manage the temperature slightly. I think I braked slightly earlier going into Lodge here just to not put as much energy into the brakes, and this was a really good practice on this run actually, because I had to follow another driver in, so I was trying to leave my braking late but also trying to make sure that I left a healthy margin to the driver ahead. Maximum speed in the pits is 60 kilometers an hour, that's 37.5 miles an hour. Thankfully Sam had it marked out on the speedometer, so just pulling in real quickly, stopping, selecting first, going again. I didn't manage this very well in the third session actually because I missed first gear, so that was a better run that time. And what we realised is it was 17.5 seconds from entering the pit lane to leaving the pit lane in that fashion, so it meant our target in the race was to be stationary for 2 minutes 12.5 seconds if we're being super precise about it. And it was good to find that out because just planning equals performance hopefully. Now, by this point in the final session, I was realising how bloody hot it gets inside these cars. It was a lovely day at Alton Park weather-wise, but the detriment to that is the temperature inside the cabin of the cars, especially because the exhaust manifold runs right by the pedal box in Sam's car, so your feet get cooked. But thankfully, I had a little bit of respite here, because coming into Old Hall, this was only a couple of laps after I came out of the pits. You can just hear the revs don't pick up, and that was the first moment of fuel starvation I had. So even though Sam was standing on the pit wall, giving me the pit balls and just making sure that I was okay, hence I gave him the thumbs up as I went past, just going into Old Hall that time, it was obvious, okay, yeah, we're out of fuel. So I just made sure that I made a good, effective in-lap here, where I still kept pace up through the corners, so that way there was good airflow to the brakes, but then I just made sure I took it easy, not into shell oils admittedly, but I took it easy throughout the rest of the lap to allow the car to cool off effectively, and then we just brought the car in, refueled, and off we went again. And it only took 4 minutes to refuel the car, so barely lost any time in the session, and I managed to get out and do another 6 or 7 laps before the end of the session was shown, and that was that. By this point, I was feeling kind of tired, mentally. I think that mostly came down to the heat in the car, to be completely honest. Like, driving 2 hours on track without that much traffic was actually fine. But it was just getting that hot.
Right, so yeah, I forgot to film any updates earlier, but I had 2 more sessions in the afternoon. Good success throughout all of those. Great success. Just consistent lapping through it. Went a bit slower than earlier, but the track was hotter. Ambient temperature went up by about 5 degrees versus when I did the second session of the day. No major issues with the car at all. Like, we had the teeniest power steering fluid leak, but sorted straight away. So good solid day, very solid car, beautifully balanced. So I was saying to Sam, like, Sam offered to possibly change like the rear camber slightly, but nah, I just thought I'd change my driving a little bit, and it feels like an absolute dream to drive around here. And Alton Park is an amazing circuit, so just really happy to be here. So yeah, the race is early tomorrow, as is qualifying. Qualifying is extremely early, so we're aiming to be ready to go at, I think it's 8:10 in the morning, and so that's kitted up in the car, good to go. The quali session actually starts, I think it's 8:45 in the morning, or it might be 8:30, but anyway, we'll be ready for it. And the race itself is at 11:15. If that's not exactly right, then it's fine. We've got a timetable, we've got it written down, because we're not, well, it's idiot proofing, or at least I need that anyway. So yeah, basically roll on tomorrow, and hopefully it will go as slick as today did. So race morning, it's about 8:05 at the moment. We've probably got 10-15 minutes before we might get called for qualifying, so we're all kitted up and ready. Sam's just double checking a few things on the car, but sure everything's fine. We've already planned that we're going to bleed the brake fluid between quali and race, but it'll be fine for the moment. Track's a lot colder than yesterday, so is air temperature actually, so tyre pressure's up all round by like 5 psi. Sam's going out first, so yeah, with qualifying, we both need to set at least 3 qualifying laps, sharing the race. So Sam's going out first, he's going to do 3, 4, 5, depending on if he thinks that there's pace to be found, he might keep going. We'll swap partway through and I'll finish it off, and we'll see where we end up.
So I thought I'd include this portion of the video just to show you what happens at the beginning of the qualifying session. Not that I experienced it, because Sam was out first, as I said. It's quite simple really. You just head over to the assembly area, as long as you know what that is. You should do by this point. Now this is the first point in the weekend that there was any noise testing going on, so you can see this marshal just coming over asking Sam to rev at 3/4 of where the red line is. His car was well within the noise limit, so there was no trouble with that. Then the marshals just direct you through to the assembly area, you queue up, you wait to be shown out on track, and that's that. Now, Sam had to bear the brunt of this in his part of the qualifying session, but you've got to try and find yourself some clear space on track, otherwise you've got no hope of setting a competitive lap time. And this was tricky for Sam. It was just really busy out on circuit. Alton Park is narrow as well, so it's difficult to overtake on, and you don't really want to be overtaking if you can help it in a qualifying session once you get on your flying laps anyway, because you're just going to wreck your lap, you're going to wreck someone else's lap. So it's difficult where you draw the line between trying to make progress through people to try and find yourself space, or if you just drop way off the back of them to create space that way. But then you don't know how many drivers are behind you, so it's such a guessing game through a qualifying session. And you also need to bear in mind other factors, such as if a driver ahead of you goes off and causes a yellow flag that would impede your lap time. Just a slight moment of foreshadowing there. So we'll see what happens just in a few corners time on this lap. So Sam's kind of got himself in a little bit of space here. This isn't a flying lap for him by any stretch. It's definitely not a clear lap. Now, if you have a look by the bridge, yellow flag just shown now, and that just says exercise caution in the next sector, but you don't know what to expect. So backs off a little bit, driver ahead goes way off, and then Sam follows. Now, this is by no means his fault at all. It turned out that there was, in Sam's words, a BMW that shat itself and unfortunately left a load of oil on the circuit, which meant that the guy in the MX-5 and Sam just arrived in the corner too fast, bearing in mind that there was oil on the circuit, and it was just impossible to avoid the inevitable spin. There wasn't a slippery surface flag out at that point because the marshals obviously hadn't realised what had happened. It was just the case of they saw a car go off the circuit and they didn't realise that there was any oil laid down, hence they just put out a yellow flag and not the slippery surface flag. And Sam didn't manage to find any real space in traffic after that, so he completed the 3 laps that he was mandated to do in qualifying, and we switched over pretty soon to me. So I think I got 6 laps in qualifying, something like that. And the first few were just me trying to find my way either through traffic or just trying to create some space for myself. So like here, for example, I'm just getting a little bit frustrated at the Mini not necessarily showing me what his intentions were on where he was going to go. But heading into this lap here, I thought, okay, well, yeah, I can hopefully push on this lap. There's enough space between me and the 2 guys ahead. Turns out the green Peugeot that you can see ahead is Jonathan Candler. I actually raced against him in some sim racing over lockdown, and he's a decent driver. This is a quick Peugeot that he was in. Unfortunately, though, on this lap, I ran wide at Old Hall and tripped the track limit sensor on the outside. And in this championship, it might be the case in others, I'm pretty sure it would be the case in others, by tripping that track limit sensor, it meant that the fastest lap that we set in this session was deleted. So it meant that whatever my second quickest lap, or our second quickest lap of the session would be the one that stood and acted as our time to qualify with. So I slowed down just coming out of Knickerbrook on the same lap. This is later on the lap we were just watching, and I felt like I'd managed to create myself enough space here to the driver ahead, who was in a BMW 318 Compact, I think that's what it was. And we were relatively on similar pace, and it looks like there's a good maybe 3 seconds between us. So I hoped that that would be enough space between the 2 of us that I could effectively have a clear lap to go as quickly as possible. As you could see, the driver ahead though had a bit of a lock-up going into Old Hall, and that was somewhat indicative of what was going to happen later on this lap as well. So like I said, you can't anticipate or control external factors, especially in a qualifying session when it's important to try and get a clear lap together. And coming down to Shell Oils, I've caught the back of him, and it's not his fault at all, but it's just unfortunate circumstance that he was pushing as hard as he could, and I caught the back of him, and that was essentially the end of any decent lap for me. And I spoke to him after the session actually, and he said he decided, even though he saw me in his review, he decided he was going to press on because this was his first chance of a properly clear lap for himself. And I can't blame him, to be fair, but I realised this and I made sure that I backed off coming through this complex and up here to make sure I gave myself a ridiculous amount of room around me to try and definitely get a clear lap on the next one. So this is later on the same lap. I've created a lot more space for myself. Thankfully, there weren't any drivers behind, so I didn't hold up anyone, so I just found myself a really good amount of space. And then I missed 4th gear and accidentally put it in 2nd, which is horribly unsympathetic on the engine. So yes, try to avoid that if you can in future, but actually, despite that misshift, this was actually to be my quickest lap of the session. Now, like I said, because of the track limits infringement I committed earlier on in the session, it meant that this lap wasn't going to count. But it was still a pretty good lap anyway, so I'm just going to go quiet and we'll watch the rest of the lap. Overall, pretty messy lap. Oversteering a few places, compromised coming up to Lodge because I had to overtake the white BMW. It was a bit touch and go with the grey Mini at the point as well, having to flash my lights at him just to make him aware that I was coming through. And this next lap was a little bit cleaner, I think. I was still compromised going to the inside of Old Hall there, so it wasn't the optimum line to take. But this lap that I set here was only a 10th slower than the previous lap. So first lap we saw was a 2-minute 1.4 something, and this one was a 2-minute 1.5 something, which was really important because that meant that this lap actually stood, and this is what managed to qualify us third on the grid. So had I not set this lap on this occasion, then my next closest lap or quickest lap was a 2-minute 3, which was still quicker than what Sam achieved just because he had so much traffic. And if that had been the lap that stood, then we would have been all the way down in 8th place, I think. So this was an important lap to get right, and even though the run through Shell Oils I got way too much oversteer mid-corner just because I was a bit too greedy on the gas, the rest of the lap's going pretty well here. Like, I've managed to neaten up my driving a lot in places. I'm still getting oversteer at points like through Knickerbrook there, but the amount of opposite lock isn't that far beyond central, so I'm not scrubbing off too much speed having to fight the car by doing that. I feel like it was quicker going a little bit sideways, as much as it's not too kind on the tyres. This is a qualifying session after all, so through Druids, really happy with that one because again, a few kicks of oversteer, but I wasn't having to correct beyond central steering position. Very hot going into Lodge on this lap, but again, not a horrendous amount of oversteer, so that ended up being a good lap. I didn't miss any gears like I did heading on to my first flyer. Checkered flag, and that's the end of the session. I didn't know at this point how I got on, but I was sure glad when I came back in to find out that I was in third.
That was so cold! Keep it on. Take her off. Nice.
2 consecutive laps is good enough for third.
6? No.
You are third overall.
Fuck me. That's cool.
And here we finally are, 40.5 minutes into the edit, arriving at the start of my first ever motor race. We had a bit of a GoPro issue in Parc Fermé, so Sam had to dash out onto the grid to fix it quickly. Thank God he did, otherwise I wouldn't have had much to show you at this point. I thought through everything I needed to do on the warming up lap, but what I didn't do is utilise the handbrake to bring up the clutch to biting point, so my start was a little bit slow, but my reaction was good. So it meant that I kept up with the 2 guys ahead of me, despite my initial not great launch, but you can see in the top view behind me that I got a good run on everyone else behind me, so I managed to maintain my starting place of 3rd, and this allowed me to just keep my eyes forward and focus on trying to catch up to the guys ahead that have already left me behind. Now, the difference in qualifying times between the top 3, I think the guy that was on pole lapped at 1 minute 57 something. Mr. Second place was 2 minutes dead, and I was 2 minutes 1.5 by my allowed time. So the lap time difference between myself and second place wasn't too dissimilar, but Mr. First Place has already checked out, so yes, well done to him on having such a dialed in car, possibly new tyres, but we won't know that unless I spoke to him. But my priority right now was on trying to get onto the back of second place, starting to realise where the differences were in our lap times on circuit. So the Honda Civics that were around me obviously had a lot more power on the straights, but I was much more capable under brakes, and I guess my minimum speeds in the corners were slightly higher as well. And unfortunately, coming round this corner here, a bit of oversteer, I think that got me a bit flustered. Managed to grab second again instead of fourth, so I lost a bit of time heading up the straight. And then I noticed the safety car sign was out on the digiboard just by the bridge, so all of that energy that I got ramped up for at the beginning of the race on the warming up lap, that all had to dissipate for the next few laps, while they recovered a car that had unfortunately gone off between Old Hall and Cascades, which is the first and second corners. And yeah, that meant I had quite a few laps ahead. So I've skipped most of the safety car periods here. It's worth mentioning that the rest of this video is going to be somewhat paraphrased, because there is a full rerun of the onboard highlights up on Sam Mckee's YouTube channel, which I'll put a link to in the description below. It's kind of obsolete me running through the whole race on my channel as well, so I'll just keep it to what I would say are the more important talking points, I suppose. So I didn't know at this point, but this was going to be the last lap we had behind the safety car. Safety car board was still flashing there, and the safety car lights are still on at this point. I think it's only when I get to pretty much the first apex, or the safety car gets to the first apex of Druids, that I then see the lights have gone out, which is why I now chose to start weaving, try and generate a little bit of surface temperature in the front tyres. But I didn't want to weave so much that I then lost sight of the leader, because I wanted to see when he was going to bolt. And as it goes, he went really early, so you can still see the safety car hasn't arrived at Lodge yet, but the leader's already gone. Now at this point I was doubting if we were actually going to get a clean run and not catch up with the safety car. What I did not expect is the safety car to look in their rear view and think, oh, better get out of the way. So to be fair to the guy in first and the guy in second, absolutely nailed the restart. I did not. And then I get mugs down the inside by the Honda Civic behind me, because it had a lot more pull down the straight. Nearly got him back on the exit, but what you'll see here is, again, just not as much power as the Civic, so I was constantly looking beside me because it was really close. This was definitely the most exciting part of the race for me. Thought, what the hell, I'll try and bring it round the outside, but because it's not positive camber on the outside at Cascades, then I just had nowhere near as much grip as the Civic, and off it went into third place. So quite a few laps have gone by this point. I was maintaining roughly a second's gap at the line to the blue Civic in third place, and it was kind of toing and froing because I had better lap time in 1/3 of the circuit, dramatically so, whereas the Civics were pulling away from me for the other 2/3 of the lap. So there'd been quite a while where we'd all had to manage our tyre temperatures because the circuit was getting really hot. Ambient temperature had definitely increased, and I think I'd managed to manage my tyre temperatures somewhat better than the guys in the Civics had. So where they were getting on the power mid-corner and getting copious amounts of understeer, well, I was able to get on the power in moderation and just remain really balanced in the mid-corner, and especially down towards Shell Oils here. Always later on the brakes by maybe 50 metres compared to them, able to hold it tighter into the corner. So I spent quite a few laps like this, really catching up very close to the back of the blue Civic ahead, but just as soon as I was coming out of Shell Oils, that was it for another lap, and I was just trying to catch up again. So I had a couple of laps where I tried to go at qualifying pace in an attempt to catch up to the blue Civic throughout the latter part of the lap, to potentially open up an opportunity for me to overtake him under braking into Shell Oils, but it was just too much on the tyres of the car. So really what I decided to do after that is just try and bring down the tyre temperatures. Sam had been counting me down for a few laps via the pit board anyway, so I knew roughly when I was going to be, well actually I knew exactly when I was going to be pitting, so I knew that I needed to try and bring the car in hot, so that way it was, I'd made the most of the stink coming in, but not so hot that the car was just going to basically cook itself in the pits. So I decided to start winding off my pace a little bit just to manage the tyre temperatures and manage the brakes. But what I didn't know is the guy in first has already pitted at this point, and then as I could see, the people in second and third pitted. So I had a little celebration right here. Because I think I realised, even though my logic wasn't sound, I thought that I was in first place, and it turns out I led a lap, which is absolutely bloody marvellous. So I savoured this in-lap. I knew I was going to be pitting on the next lap, but I have to admit, it's a rather jolly feeling knowing that you're in first place in your first race. And yes, it was absolutely temporary. It was just for the one lap, but yeah, I'm still going to savour it nonetheless. Unfortunately, I got held up a little bit on my in-lap by the Silver Civic you can see in the rear camera, but it was still a pretty good pace for the in-lap. I wasn't too harsh on the brakes, but I could have backed off more. I just got too involved with the Silver Civic. Also grabbed second there again, which is a really awful thing to be doing, but thankfully no harm done to the car because I had good reactions to get out second quick. Pulled into the pits pretty quickly here. I have to admit, a little bit intimidating because there was the car in Garage 2 and Garage 4, so I didn't have as much space to move in as I thought I might have done. Simple procedure in the pits. Because of COVID-19 measures, then one of the tasks I had to do after getting out was I had to quickly spray down elements of the car that I have touched or I might have breathed on essentially. So things like the steering wheel, the gear knob, they just had to be quickly wiped down. Sam decided to spend his time during the pit stop just going around the car checking the tyre pressures, and Sam's mum actually standing in front of the car keeping time on how long we'd been in the pits. So with the pit stop done, Sam headed out and he was due to have roughly 15 minutes left on the race. As you can see, full send out of the pit straight away, no holding back there, just making a few adjustments to what he prefers in his car. Like there's a lap timer that was just in front of the speedo which hadn't been activated, and also he has an incredibly high-tech capacitor timer in the centre console. If you can see that, that's just to help count down how long you've had in the race, which he likes. I didn't turn it on and I wasn't looking at it for my part of the race. I was just trying to drive fast, don't crash basically. But he's obviously used to his working environment, so he's just started settling himself in now, really on pace to start with, so it's worth watching Sam's part of the race on his YouTube channel as well, because honestly, fabulous driver. And yes, he's been racing this car for 4 seasons now, but still, you can see he's just on it straight away. So cutting forward about 3 laps here, Sam's well settled into his race pace now, the gap to the car in front and behind remains relatively consistent, and as Sam came out of Cascades here, unfortunately off to the left of the picture, you might have just seen that blue Civic had oversteered on the exit of Cascades and piled into the tyres, so really bad luck for them. It was a strange looking accident watching it back on their footage. It looked like there might have been a mechanical failure with their car, but I don't know from the guys, to be completely honest. The upshot of it, because every cloud has a silver lining, cliche, is that we inherited third place from that incident for them. So good news for us, just a shame that it happened in that way. Jumping forwards a few more laps again, Sam's still in third place. There's a big gap to the guys in front and a reasonable gap to the guys behind, and unbeknown to us there had been another car go off on circuit somewhere, got stranded, so the race officials decided to red flag the race with 5 minutes left, which is unfortunate for Sam, but it meant for us we finished third. And I just managed to get the pit board out for Sam to be able to see it there, which is the first time I'd actually managed to get the pit board together because I was being a bit of a silly one. But yeah, that was that. We finished third. It's just, yeah, mad achievement, honestly. I still think back to it, and we didn't get a trophy. That doesn't matter. We were invitational class, but more to the point, just finishing on the podium in my first race is not something that I entertained the thought of at all, but yeah, absolutely mega that it actually happened. Yeah, and as Sam's saying, it's really hot in there. I went round without the windows open because my thinking was windows up, quicker, less drag, but yeah, man, it must have been absolutely baking in that car for him, bless him.
Did you get all that?
Now, we were really fortunate to be joined by Alexi from Thunderwood Racing. I got second place in a sim racing contest over lockdown, and my reward for that was some social media content, so here's an interview we did. I don't think that could have gone any better realistically for first car race, which is awesome. Yeah, I owe it to Sam, because as we've said earlier, yeah, I did most of the driving, all of the driving in testing yesterday and most of the driving today, but all the hard work was done before we got here with the car setup. And yeah, third place. Who would have thought?
Did you ever feel under threat? So you began in third place, you had another 24 or whatever cars behind you.
Yeah.
How were you thinking you were going to get through all of your stint without losing all of that? Because they're quick drivers here.
Yeah, just eyes forward. Like, that's something that I remember hearing. Funnily enough, when I was doing a Nürburgring track day a few years ago, I was looking in my mirrors a lot, being being in my GC86 on that day, and there was so many quicker cars going around. The guy was just like, eyes forward, otherwise you're never going to go as quick as you can. So, like, yeah, checking your mirrors every now and then just for a bit of awareness, but if you're looking at the car ahead of you that's escaping and you try and chase it without going completely overboard, then yeah, it sort of eggs you on to go faster. So after the safety car pulled in, and I think my restart was alright, but I just didn't have the same legs as the Honda Civics around me. When I got overtaken down the inside of Old Hall, after that, again, I wasn't looking in my mirrors to see, like, who's the next guy that's going to overtake me. I was like, oh, I want to catch this guy. So it's not intimidated or worried, just I was like, damn it, I thought I was going to hold third, and so I came in fourth, but it's okay. But so it's good, it feels quick. Not like blow your brains out quick, but then it means that you've got enough mental capacity to, well, drive the heck out of it, hopefully. So yeah, it was great. And pretty busy this year, aren't you? But you're looking for new recruits, basically, for next year. Always looking for new recruits. So yeah, the website is there.
So you had Rob in the car, Rob's first race.
Yes.
How many races have you had? Is this kind of your first race, your second race?
This is my fourth season, actually. So this, I'd have to check because I've raced a few other cars as well, but in this car it's the 22nd race. So I think probably 25 or 26 in total.
Is this your best result?
No, we've had a couple of class wins and podiums in big endurance races as well. But as a first outing for a newcomer, it's absolutely astonishing. We got here on Thursday evening, and Rob was testing all day on Friday to learn the circuit, learn the car. and the acclimatisation he needed was so brief. He was right up on the pace immediately. In his second session, he's within the lap times I was doing in my last endurance race here in September, and it's just astonishing. But better than that is when he comes out the car, I can sit there with the debrief sheet and get a load of detailed information about what the car's doing, how it feels, how it is in high and low speed corners, understand completely what's going on while he's driving at that kind of pace. It's brilliant. It's really, really rare to find and makes it an absolute pleasure. All day long we put 125 miles in the car in testing. Nothing went wrong with it, didn't fall off, no issues, and he just got faster and more consistent through the day. Then we went out in qualifying and he put it third, which 2 laps good enough for third overall in a championship. We've never raced him before. The car's intended for a different series. The car normally races with 750 Motor Club. Here we're here with MSVR, and it's eligible but not quite as powerful as it's allowed to be. We're giving away a bit of performance, and still he qualifies it third with 2 laps good enough for that. Just astonishing. From the pit wall, certainly it was brilliant to watch. Sometimes it's a bit strange watching your own car going past in race traffic, but I wasn't too worried because Rob's got a lot of racing experience from Club 100, from karts, but also seemed to have the right head on. I have to keep talking him down a little bit because he says, no, it's your car, you have to drive it home afterwards. Yeah, but race it, go and race it. So I've been so pleased the whole way through. And I jumped in at the end to do the last 15 minutes of the race, and the car felt fantastic, felt quick, felt smooth, felt like nothing had got damaged during the race, and we came home third after 40 minutes of racing.
So, in summary, to anyone who is still watching after nearly 57 minutes, congratulations, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's been informative as to what it could be like on your first race weekend. I have to admit mine was bloody excellent, so I'd highly recommend it to anyone who's silly enough to spend the Wonga but have lots of fun. Massive thanks goes out to Sam Mckee. Honestly, the weekend wouldn't have been as amazing if it wasn't spent with him. Just absolutely meticulous preparation on his car and attention to detail with everything to do with the race weekend. And a right good laugh. So, yeah, I would highly recommend sharing your first race experience with him for sure. Links are in the description below if you would like to get in contact with Sam and organise a race meeting with him and his BMW. Also, special thanks to Alexi Wood from Thunderwood Racing for the awesome snaps and also for the interview content you saw just now. I will be back racing with Sam later this year. Details will be announced shortly. Until then, hope you stay well. See you soon.